Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a seriously fascinating paradox sitting right at the heart of our modern world. I mean, think about the very device you're using to listen to this right now. We are constantly surrounded by the promise of clean energy and this frictionless, totally dematerialized digital future, right? But today, we're going to look behind the curtain at the massive physical footprint that is hiding just out of sight.
Okay, let's dive into this. We naturally assume that things like electric vehicles, solar panels, and our sleek digital workspaces are inherently good for the Earth. I mean, they're marketed to us as our ultimate ticket away from fossil fuels and heavy industrial pollution. But to truly understand these technologies, we have to look past that pristine end product. We need to examine the entire life cycle, literally from the hole in the ground all the way to the factory and eventually to the scrap heap.
Consider this shocking number, 544 kilograms. That is the weight of just the battery inside a single Tesla Model S. It makes up roughly a quarter of the entire car's weight. Back in 2012, a UCLA study mapped out the actual material reality of these vehicles, highlighting that this massive battery is packed with rare metals. We're talking lithium, copper, cobalt, and mostly nickel. And all of these require incredibly intense mining, refining, and global transportation before they ever even get close to an assembly line.
Which brings us to a pretty stark comparison. Now, while electric vehicles undeniably save on petrol and emissions over their driving lifespan, the actual industrial process required to build them, it takes 3 to 4 times more energy than a conventional car. And here's where it gets really tricky. If the electric grid charging that EV runs predominantly on coal, which is exactly the case in countries like China, India, and Australia, a fast-charging electric vehicle might actually generate more carbon dioxide over its total life cycle than your traditional petrol car.
You know, it's a very similar story with solar energy. Based on the source data, manufacturing just one standard photovoltaic solar panel generates about 70 kilograms of carbon dioxide just from the silicon processing alone. And if we look at thermal solar farms, the water footprint is absolutely staggering. They can consume up to 3,500 liters of water per single megawatt hour. That is actually 50% more water than a coal-fired plant requires. And here's the real kicker. That is particularly problematic since solar farms are almost always built in totally water-scarce deserts.
So what about the digital transition? Tech optimists and thinkers like Jeremy Rifkin have really championed this utopian myth of a dematerialized age of access. The whole idea is that by moving our lives, our power grids, and our economies up into the cloud, we're going to naturally moderate our consumption and just leave our resource-guzzling past behind us. Sounds great, right? But the reality tells the exact opposite story. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. 1 to 1,000. That ratio represents the final product versus the waste created during its manufacture. Specifically, producing a single tiny 2-gram microchip generates 2 whole kilograms of waste. The electronics industry is swallowing up enormous percentages of global rare metals like palladium and cobalt every single year. So, the shift to a digital age is actually anything but dematerialized. It is heavily dependent on a colossal, largely invisible physical infrastructure. Just think about the energy costs of our everyday digital habits. The simple act of sending a single email with an attachment uses the exact same amount of electricity as leaving a high-wattage bulb on for a full hour. Scale that up globally, and our daily email traffic alone consumes about 50 gigawatts an hour. To put that into perspective, that's the equivalent output of 15 nuclear power stations. If the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of electricity on Earth. Feeding this massive digital leviathan requires constellations of satellites, miles of underwater cables, and huge data centers, all built with and powered by incredibly resource-intensive materials.
Section 1. The broken recycling promise and the complexity of e-waste.
So naturally, you might be wondering, if we are mining all these materials, why can't we just recycle our way out of this? Well, Japan has actually tried pioneering this by mining urban e-waste from dumps. But let's use a metaphor to understand why it's just so difficult. Think of making modern technology like baking a loaf of bread. Manufacturers don't use rare metals in their pure state. They mix them into complex alloys to get the absolute best performance. It's just like mixing flour, water, and yeast to bake that bread. Trying to recycle those rare metals? It's literally like trying to extract the original flour and yeast out of a fully baked loaf. It requires an insanely complex, costly, and energy-intensive chemical divorce. Because of this intense chemical complexity, it is currently much cheaper for manufacturers to just mine fresh raw materials than to try and recycle the old ones. Out of the 60 most used industrial metals, only 18 have a recycling rate above 50%. For 36 of them, the recycling rate is below 10%.
And for those incredibly crucial rare metals we need, like indium, gallium, and tantalum, the recycling rate sits at a totally bleak 0 to 3%. So the dream of a circular economy, at least for now, remains economically out of reach for these vital tech ingredients.
Section 2. Outsourcing the pollution and the geopolitical illusion of clean tech.
If the mining of these materials is so incredibly toxic and the recycling is so difficult, how on earth does the Western world maintain this pristine illusion of clean tech? Well, the simple answer is they outsource the pollution. The history of rare earth dominance tells the whole story. Back in 1965, the United States was the dominant player, largely through the Mountain Pass mine in California. By the 1980s, France was refining about 50% of the global supply of strategic rare earths at the Rhone-Poulenc plant. But fast forward to the 2000s, and this dominance had shifted entirely to China, which secured a near monopoly.
So why did the West willingly hand over the reins? Mainly because of the devastating ecological disasters happening right at their own facilities. At the U.S. Mountain Pass mine, around 4 million liters of toxic wastewater spilled into the Mojave Desert, severely contaminating the soil and groundwater. Meanwhile, in La Rochelle, France, it's estimated that 10,000 tons of weekly radioactive waste, which is actually a natural byproduct of separating rare earth minerals from radioactive elements like thorium, were discharged straight into the ocean. Facing intense public outrage and tightening environmental regulations, Western companies basically looked for an exit strategy.
And China happily provided that exit. They secured a global monopoly through a highly effective strategy of both trade and environmental dumping. By basically ignoring the immense costs of environmental protection and repair, Chinese producers could drop the price of rare earths to as low as $2.80 per kilo. It perfectly echoed a rather controversial logic once outlined in an internal World Bank memo by Larry Summers: just shift the polluting industries to poorer countries. The West wanted all the clean technology, but without the dirty backyard. China seized the economic opportunity by providing rock-bottom prices and in the process absorbed the immense ecological damage.
And this dynamic doesn't just apply to the mining of new materials. It totally applies to the graveyard of our old ones, too. When you discard your old electronics, a massive portion of it does not get responsibly recycled at home. Instead, an estimated 80% of U.S. e-waste and up to 1.5 million tons from Europe is illicitly shipped right back to developing nations. Often it's cynically mislabeled as humanitarian aid or secondhand goods, but this waste actually ends up in toxic dumps in Asia and Africa, completing a cycle that conveniently keeps the pollution entirely out of the West's line of sight.
Section 3. The Modern Cargo Cult and the Delusion of Clean Consumption. This all brings us to a final, really fascinating philosophical reflection on our blind consumption. Back in the 20th century, isolated Melanesian islanders witnessed Western military planes dropping these incredible supplies onto their beaches. Having absolutely no understanding of the vast industrial networks that actually produced these goods, they formed what became known as cargo cults. They built fake airstrips and just waited for the goods to miraculously arrive again. And today, we are essentially acting out a modern version of this cargo cult. We demand millions of sleek devices and green technologies to just seamlessly arrive at our doorsteps, all while remaining willfully blind to the massive, incredibly dirty mining networks required to actually build them.
So the absolutely crucial point we have to ask ourselves is this: are we actually saving the planet, or are we just shifting the burden? As the source material brilliantly concludes, future generations might look back at our supposedly clean energy transition and say, our 21st century ancestors, they're the ones who took metals out of one hole and put them in another. It really leaves us with a provocative question to ponder. In our massive rush to cure our addiction to oil, are we simply sleepwalking into a brand new rare metals disaster? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I truly hope it changes the way you look at the devices right in front of you.